Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The Caribbean night pressed down on Captain Rowan Mackenzie like a burial shroud, thick with humidity and the weight of 1,000 regrets. His weathered hands gripped the ship's wheel as the Siren's Revenge drifted aimlessly through waters black as spilled ink. The moon hung like a tarnished coin above, casting pale silver streaks across the restless waves that lapped against his vessel's hull with the rhythm of a dying heartbeat. Rowan's crew had abandoned him 3 days ago in Port Royal, their pockets heavy with their share of the last raid's spoils, their loyalty evaporating like morning mist when faced with his increasingly erratic behavior. They called him cursed behind his back, whispered that the sea itself had turned against him. Perhaps they weren't wrong. For months now, every venture had ended in disaster. Ships that should have been easy prey had fought back with supernatural fury. Storms had appeared from cloudless skies, and good men had died for nothing more than fool's gold and empty chests. The bottle of rum sat beside him on the deck, its amber contents catching the moonlight like liquid fire. It was the last of his personal reserve, aged 15 years in oak barrels and worth more than most men saw in a lifetime. Rowan had been saving it for a special occasion that never seemed to come, and now it seemed fitting that he might drink it alone as his ship slowly surrendered to the indifferent sea. The Siren's Revenge was taking on water through cracks that had appeared overnight, as if the very wood had grown tired of floating and longed to return to the ocean floor. A sound drifted across the water, weak, desperate, barely human. Rowan's salt-crusted eyes scanned the darkness until he spotted something pale bobbing in the waves about 50 yards to starboard. At first he thought it might be debris from another wreck, perhaps a piece of sailcloth or driftwood bleached white by sun and salt. But then the sound came again, a ragged cough followed by a plea that cut through the night air like a blade through silk. "Help! Please!" Rowan's hand moved instinctively toward the rum bottle, then stopped. Every instinct honed by 20 years of piracy screamed at him to sail on. Survivors meant complications, questions, and the possibility of disease or worse, curse. But something in that voice, something broken and pleading, stirred memories he'd tried to drown in rum and violence. He remembered being young and desperate himself, clinging to wreckage off the coast of Nassau while sharks circled below and the sun burned his skin to leather. With movements that spoke of deep weariness, Rowan adjusted the wheel and let the current carry him closer to the floating figure. As the distance closed, he could make out the shape of a man, thin, pale as bone, wearing the tattered remains of a naval uniform that had once been blue but now appeared gray in the moonlight. The man's dark hair was plastered to his skull, and his eyes, when they found Rowan's, held the hollow look of someone who had already made peace with death. "Ahoy there!" Rowan called out, his voice rough from disuse. "Can you swim to the ladder?" The man in the water tried to respond but only managed a weak shake of his head. Blood stained the water around him, dark ribbons that caught the moonlight like oil. Rowan cursed under his breath and secured a rope to the ship's rail, then lowered it down. It took several attempts and considerable effort, but eventually he managed to haul the stranger aboard, where the man collapsed onto the deck like a landed fish, gasping and shivering despite the warm Caribbean air. Up close, Rowan could see that the man was younger than he'd first appeared, perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of refined features that spoke of good breeding and education. His naval uniform bore the insignia of a lieutenant, though the brass buttons were tarnished and several were missing entirely. A long gash ran along his left side, sealed with salt and seaweed, but still seeping blood onto the weathered deck planks. "What's your name, sailor?" Rowan asked, kneeling beside the injured man. "Lieutenant James Hartwell," the man whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of waves against the hull. "HMS Defiance. We were carrying something terrible." Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. He'd heard stories about the Defiance, a Royal Navy vessel that had vanished 3 weeks ago while transporting prisoners and cargo from Jamaica to Charleston. The official reports claimed it had been lost in a storm, but rumors in the taverns of Tortuga spoke of something far more sinister. "Where's your ship, lad?" Hartwell's eyes rolled upward, showing white in the darkness. "Gone. All gone." The captain thought he could control it, but some things should stay buried beneath the waves. The man was delirious, clearly, his mind addled by blood loss and exposure. But something in his tone made Rowan's weathered hands tremble slightly as he reached for his water barrel. The fresh water was nearly gone, just enough for perhaps 2 more days if rationed carefully. Still, he filled a cup and held it to Hartwell's cracked lips, watching as the man drank greedily. "Easy now," Rowan murmured. "Too much too fast and you'll lose it all again." Hartwell's hand suddenly shot out and gripped Rowan's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes, now fully focused despite their fevered gleam, locked onto the pirate captain's face. You're Mackenzie, aren't you? The Siren's Revenge. I've heard the stories." Rowan nodded slowly, unsure whether this recognition was a blessing or a curse. His reputation had preceded him to some dark places over the years. "Then you know about guilt," Hartwell continued, his voice gaining strength. "About the weight of sins that follow you like barnacles on a hull, growing heavier with each passing year." The observation struck closer to home than Rowan cared to admit. He glanced at the rum bottle sitting nearby, its amber contents seeming to glow with inner fire, the last of his comfort, the final barrier between himself and the crushing weight of his memories. But looking down at this dying man, this enemy who should have been left to the sharks and the depths, Rowan found himself reaching for the bottle with steady hands. "Perhaps I do," he said quietly, uncorking the precious rum. The scent that escaped was like distilled sunshine in distant islands rich with vanilla and oak and the promise of forgetfulness. "Perhaps we all carry more than we can bear." He held the bottle to Hartwell's lips and the naval officer drank deeply, his eyes closing in something approaching bliss as the aged spirit burned away the salt and pain. When he opened them again, tears had begun to track down his sun-damaged cheeks. 15 years I've served the crown," Hartwell whispered. 15 years of honor and duty, and in the end, it meant nothing. When the thing in the hold began to sing, when the crew started dying one by one, honor became just another word for stupidity. Rowan took a small sip of the rum himself, feeling it burn a warm path down his throat. "What was in the hold, lad?" "Something that should have stayed buried. A chest, ornate, golden, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. We pulled it from a wreck off Port Royal, thought it was just treasure. But treasure doesn't whisper in the dark. Treasure doesn't make strong men weep for their mothers as they leap into shark-infested waters." The wind picked up, causing the ship's rigging to sing a mournful tune. Somewhere in the distance, Rowan thought he could hear an answering call, faint and melancholy, like voices carried on the current from very far away. Hartwell's grip on Rowan's wrist tightened again. "Promise me something, pirate. When you find it, and you will find it, the sea makes sure of that. Promise me you won't let greed cloud your judgment. Some prices are too high, even for treasure beyond imagination." "What are you talking about?" But Hartwell's eyes were already growing distant, his breathing shallow and labored. The rum had given him a final burst of clarity, but it was fading fast like a candle in a strong wind. "The map, written in salt and sorrow. Follow it if you dare. But remember, mercy given freely is the only currency the sea truly values." His hand fell away from Rowan's wrist and his breathing stopped with a final rattling sigh. Lieutenant James Hartwell of Her Majesty's Navy had died as he had lived, far from home, surrounded by endless water, with only the stars as witnesses to his passing. Rowan sat back on his heels, staring down at the dead man, and feeling the familiar weight of grief settle onto his shoulders like an old coat. Another soul gone to the depths, another story that would never be finished. He finished the rum in 3 long swallows, feeling the last of his comfort disappear into the void that seemed to be consuming everything in his life. As dawn approached with fingers of gold and pink stretching across the eastern horizon, Rowan prepared Hartwell's body for burial at sea, wrapping him in spare sailcloth and weighing the bundle with chain. He spoke the traditional words over the wrapped figure, though he wasn't sure if a pirate's blessing carried any weight in whatever came after death. But as he consigned Lieutenant James Hartwell to the deep, something extraordinary happened. The morning light caught something floating in the distance, something that definitely hadn't been there during the long night. A chest, ornate and golden, bobbing in the gentle swells like a cork, moving steadily toward the Siren's Revenge as if drawn by invisible currents. The golden chest bobbed closer with each passing wave, as if the ocean itself was delivering it directly to Rowan's weathered hands. He watched in stunned silence as the ornate box, easily 3 feet long and carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift in the morning light, came to rest against the hull of the Siren's Revenge. with a soft, metallic thud. Rowan's first instinct was to retreat. Hartwell's warnings echoed in his mind like church bells tolling for the dead, and every superstition learned in 2 decades of sailing screamed at him to push the cursed thing away and sail in the opposite direction. But curiosity had always been his weakness, the trait that had led him from a respectable merchant's son to the notorious captain of a pirate vessel. His hands moved almost of their own accord, securing a rope around the chest and hauling it aboard. The moment his fingers touched the golden surface, a shock ran through his body like lightning striking the mainmast. Images flashed behind his eyes, a great ship burning on the horizon, men screaming as they threw themselves into shark-infested waters, and something dark and terrible rising from the depths to claim what it considered rightfully its own. But beneath the horror he sensed something else, a profound sadness, ancient and deep as the ocean trenches. The chest was impossibly heavy for its size, requiring all of Rowan's considerable strength to drag it fully onto the deck. The golden surface was warm to the touch despite having floated in the cool morning water, and the carved symbols seemed to pulse with their own inner rhythm, like a heartbeat, or the slow breathing of something vast and patient. 3 locks secured the lid, each one different from the others. The first was conventional enough, a standard brass mechanism that any competent locksmith could have fashioned. The second appeared to be made of coral and bone, twisted together in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The third wasn't a lock at all, but rather a depression in the shape of a human hand, worn smooth by countless touches over what must have been centuries. Rowan had expected the locks to resist his efforts, but they opened with surprising ease. The brass mechanism clicked open at his first attempt with his knife. The coral lock crumbled to powder at his touch, and when he pressed his palm against the hand-shaped depression, it sank inward with a soft sigh, as if the chest had been waiting specifically for him. The lid opened to reveal a treasure that would have made the governors of 3 nations weep with envy. Gold coins from a dozen different countries spilled over the edges of silk-lined compartments, their surfaces gleaming like captured sunlight. Strings of pearls lay coiled like sleeping serpents, each one perfectly round and lustrous. Precious gems, rubies like drops of blood, emeralds like pieces of the deepest sea, diamonds that fractured the morning light into rainbow fragments, filled every available space. But it was what lay beneath the treasure that made Rowan's breath catch in his throat. A map, drawn on what appeared to be human skin, its surface covered with text written in what looked like salt crystals and dark stains that could only be dried blood. The coastlines were familiar, the Caribbean islands he had sailed for most of his adult life, but marked with symbols and notations in languages he didn't recognize. As he lifted the map from its resting place, words began to appear across its surface, written in the same salt and blood script. They formed slowly, as if an invisible hand was writing them even as he watched. To he who showed mercy when mercy was not deserved, the sea offers a choice. Follow the path of sorrow to where James Hartwell's story truly began, and learn the price of redemption. But know this, every treasure has its guardian, and some debts can only be paid in full. A cold wind swept across the deck, though the morning had been perfectly still moments before. The map in Rowan's hands began to glow with pale phosphorescence, and he could see a route marked in shimmering lines that led southeast through waters he knew well, toward a cluster of small islands that didn't appear on any official charts he'd ever seen. More words appeared. 3 trials await in the place where the forgotten rest. Face them with the same courage you showed in offering comfort to a dying enemy, and the sea may yet forgive the blood on your hands. Fail, and join the countless souls who guard the treasure for eternity. Rowan set the map aside with trembling fingers and examined the rest of the chest's contents more carefully. Hidden beneath the gold and gems was a leather journal, its pages yellow with age and salt spray. The writing inside was in English, though the ink had faded to brown in many places. It appeared to be a ship's log, but not from any vessel Rowan recognized. The entries detailed a voyage that had taken place nearly a century ago, when a Spanish treasure galleon called the Maria Celestial had been carrying a fortune in Aztec gold from Mexico to Spain. According to the journal, the ship had been attacked by pirates, but these weren't ordinary buccaneers seeking easy wealth. They had been led by a captain named Blackheart Morrison, a man whose reputation for cruelty was legendary, even among the bloodthirsty Brotherhood of the Caribbean. Morrison had tortured the Maria Celestial's crew for days, trying to force them to reveal the location of an even greater treasure. a mystical artifact said to grant its owner power over the seas themselves. When the Spanish sailors proved they knew nothing of such a relic, Morrison had cursed them in the name of dark powers he served, condemning their souls to guard the treasure until someone worthy could break the curse through acts of genuine compassion. The final entry in the journal was written in a different hand, weaker, more desperate. Lieutenant James Hartwell, HMS Defiance. If anyone finds this record, know that we thought we were simply recovering lost treasure from a sunken wreck. We didn't understand that some things are buried for good reason. The chest chooses its own bearer, and the sea demands justice for old sins. I pray whoever reads this has a cleaner soul than mine. As Rowan finished reading, he became aware of a sound he hadn't noticed before. Singing, faint and mournful, carried on the wind from somewhere far below the waves. It was a lament in Spanish, sung by voices that seemed to echo up from the very depths of the ocean. The words were unclear, but the emotion was unmistakable. An endless grieving for lives cut short and justice long denied. The phosphorescent lines on the map pulsed brighter, and Rowan found himself studying the route they indicated. It would take him through some of the most dangerous waters in the Caribbean, areas known for sudden storms, treacherous currents, and reefs that could tear the bottom out of an unwary ship. But if the treasure was real, if there was even a chance of redemption for the countless sins that weighted his soul like anchors, he looked at the Siren's Revenge, noting how the morning light revealed just how badly his ship had deteriorated. The rigging was frayed, the sails were patched in a dozen places, and the hull bore scars from countless battles and close calls. She was still seaworthy, but barely, and sailing alone into dangerous waters with a vessel in such condition was tantamount to suicide. Yet as he stood there, weighing his options, Rowan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning man clutching at driftwood, but the steady, warming hope of a traveler who has finally glimpsed his destination after wandering lost for far too long. The singing from beneath the waves grew louder, more insistent, and now he could make out individual voices in the chorus. Men and women, young and old, all bound together by shared suffering and the patient faith that someday, someone would come to set them free. Their music wrapped around his heart like gentle hands, and for the first time since his crew had abandoned him, Captain Rowan Mackenzie felt truly alive. 3 days into his journey following the mystical map, Rowan encountered the first sign that he was sailing into waters where the natural laws held little sway. The Siren's Revenge had been making good time despite her deteriorating condition, carried forward by winds that seemed to blow from impossible directions and currents that defied every chart he'd ever studied. The phosphorescent route on the map pulsed steadily brighter as he drew closer to his destination, and the voices from beneath the waves had grown from a distant whisper to a constant, mournful chorus that followed his ship like invisible escorts. It was near sunset when the mist began to rise. At first, Rowan thought nothing of it. Fog was common enough in these waters, especially as the day's heat met the cooling ocean surface. But this mist was different. It rose in perfect spirals, forming columns that stretched impossibly high into the darkening sky, and within its gray embrace, shapes began to materialize that made his blood run cold. Ships, dozens of them, emerging from the fog like memories given form. Spanish galleons with their ornate carvings and towering stern castles sailed alongside sleek pirate vessels and sturdy merchant ships from a dozen different eras. Some bore the scars of ancient battles, shattered masts, gaping holes in their hulls, rigging that hung like spiderwebs in an abandoned house. Others appeared pristine, as if they had just left port, their crews moving about the decks with the fluid motions of men who had been dead for decades but refused to acknowledge the fact. The ghost fleet surrounded the Siren's Revenge in a vast circle, their spectral crews watching Rowan with hollow eyes that glowed like foxfire in the gathering darkness. He could hear their voices now, not the mournful singing of the cursed Spanish sailors, but the rough calls and commands of pirates and naval officers, merchants and slaves, all bound together by the same supernatural curse that had claimed their ships and souls. At the center of the ghost fleet, one vessel stood apart from the others. She was a massive frigate, black as midnight and flying colors that bore a skull crowned with thorns, the personal banner of Blackheart Morrison himself. The Damnation's Pride had been Morrison's flagship, and according to every story Rowan had ever heard, she had been sunk by a combined fleet of Spanish and British warships over 70 years ago. Yet here she sailed, as real and menacing as the day she had first tasted blood. A voice boomed across the water, carried by supernatural winds that made the ghost ship's sails snap and billow, despite the perfectly still air around Rowan's vessel. The voice was cultured, educated, with the kind of accent that spoke of fine breeding corrupted by years of violence and cruelty. "Captain Mackenzie, how delightful to finally meet the man whose reputation has reached even these cursed waters. I am Blackheart Morrison, though I suspect my fame has preceded me." A gangplank of solid moonlight materialized between the two ships, its surface rippling like liquid silver, but solid enough to support weight. Morrison himself stepped onto it, and Rowan got his first look at the legendary pirate captain who had terrorized the Caribbean for nearly 2 decades before his supposed death. Morrison was tall and lean, dressed in a coat of midnight blue that was somehow both elegant and sinister. His face was aristocratic, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes that burned with unnatural fire, but it was his smile that truly marked him as something no longer human, too wide, revealing teeth like polished ivory that had been filed to points. His famous black beard was woven with small bones and carved trinkets, and where his left hand should have been, a hook of what appeared to be crystallized starlight gleamed in the phantom light. "You've been making quite the stir in my realm," Morrison continued, walking across the moonlight bridge with perfect confidence. "Showing mercy to dying enemies, sharing precious rum with men who should be your natural foes. Such behavior is unexpected from one of our profession." Rowan's hand moved instinctively to the cutlass at his side, though he suspected steel would be useless against whatever Morrison had become. "I'm just following the map, Morrison. I have no quarrel with you or your crew." Morrison laughed, the sound like breaking glass mixed with distant thunder. "Oh, but you do, my dear fellow. You see, that chest you've so generously accepted comes with certain obligations. The Spanish dogs I cursed all those years ago made a bargain with powers far older and hungrier than themselves. They offered their souls as guardians of the treasure, hoping that someday someone worthy might come to break their chains. But worthiness must be proven, Captain Mackenzie. Tested. Earned." The ghost captain gestured to his spectral fleet, and Rowan could see that the crews of every ship were now watching him with intense interest. Some faces showed hope, the Spanish sailors who had been cursed for Morrison's crimes, while others displayed naked hunger for violence and bloodshed. "3 trials await you," Morrison announced, his voice carrying clearly across the supernatural stillness. 3 tests that will determine whether you possess the courage, wisdom, and compassion necessary to break a curse that has endured for nearly a century. Fail any one of them, and your soul joins our eternal voyage. Succeed in all 3, and the Spanish dogs go free, though I suspect the price of victory may be higher than you're prepared to pay. What are these trials? Morrison's pointed smile widened. The first is simple enough, a test of courage in the face of certain death. Behind you. Rowan spun around to see that the water behind his ship had begun to churn and bubble, as if something massive was rising from the depths. The ocean swelled upward in a great dome, and then burst apart as a creature from the deepest nightmares of sailors emerged into the fading light. It was a kraken, but not like any Rowan had ever heard described in tavern tales. This beast was ancient beyond measure, its tentacles thick as ship's masts and covered with scars that spoke of countless battles. Its eyes were the size of wagon wheels, burning with intelligence and malevolent purpose. But most terrifying of all, its flesh was translucent, revealing the skeletal remains of dozens of ships and thousands of sailors, trapped within its ghostly body like insects in amber. "Meet Leviathan," Morrison called out cheerfully, "the guardian of the deep roads, and the first of your trials. He's been waiting patiently for someone brave enough to face him in single combat. The rules are simple. Defeat him, and you may proceed. Die, and join his collection of maritime memorabilia." The kraken's tentacles rose from the water like columns of living death, each one capable of crushing the siren's revenge to splinters. But Rowan noticed something that gave him a flicker of hope. Among the ghostly remains trapped within the creature's translucent flesh, he could see the broken hull of a Spanish galleon, and standing on its deck, the spectral forms of sailors who watched him with desperate eyes. These weren't just random victims. They were the crew of the Maria Celestial, the original guardians of the treasure, trapped for decades within the belly of this supernatural beast. If he could free them, perhaps he could begin to understand what true redemption might cost. Rowan drew his cutlass and checked the priming of his pistols, knowing that conventional weapons would likely prove useless against such a creature. But as he prepared to face certain death, he felt the weight of the golden chest behind him and remembered Hartwell's final words about mercy being the only currency the sea truly valued. The Kraken struck without warning, its massive tentacles crashing down onto the deck of the Siren's Revenge with enough force to snap the mainmast like kindling. Rowan threw himself to one side, rolling across the wet planks as another tentacle swept through the space where he had been standing. The creature's beak, large enough to swallow a whale, emerged from the water and snapped at the ship's hull, taking out a section of the port rail. But as Rowan fought for his life against an enemy that defied all reason, he began to notice something strange. The Kraken's attacks, while devastating, seemed almost careful, as if the creature was testing him rather than simply trying to kill him. And when he looked into those massive, burning eyes, he saw not mindless hunger, but a profound sadness that reminded him of his own reflection in the mirror each morning. This was not just a monster. It was a prisoner, cursed to guard the treasure just as surely as the Spanish sailors trapped within its ghostly flesh. And if Rowan was to have any hope of passing the first trial, he would need to find a way to show mercy to a creature that appeared incapable of receiving it. As the Kraken's tentacles thrashed around his ship, Rowan made a decision that went against every survival instinct honed by 20 years of piracy. Instead of fighting the creature, he sheathed his cutlass and walked deliberately to the center of the deck, directly beneath Leviathan's massive burning gaze. "I know what you are," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the supernatural chaos. "You're not a monster, you're a prisoner, just like the souls trapped inside you. Morrison cursed you to guard what should never have been taken, and you've been suffering for his crimes ever since." The Kraken's attack slowed, then stopped entirely. Its enormous eyes focused on Rowan with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into his soul. "I can't free you with violence," Rowan continued, "but maybe I can offer you the same thing I gave Hartwell, acknowledgement of your pain and genuine sorrow for the injustice done to you." He knelt on the deck and bowed his head in a gesture of respect and compassion. "I'm sorry for what was done to you. I'm sorry for the centuries of loneliness and rage." The Kraken's massive head tilted slightly, then its translucent flesh began to pulse with gentle light. The ghostly forms of the Maria Celestial's crew became more distinct within its body, pressing against the creature's skin from the inside, their mouths opening in songs of gratitude. With a sound like a great cathedral bell tolling underwater, Leviathan began to dissolve peacefully. The trapped souls emerged like butterflies from crystalline cocoons, their ghostly forms solidifying into translucent but clearly human shapes. Captain Diego Mendoza stepped forward and bowed deeply to Rowan. "You have passed the first trial, Capitan Mackenzie, but 2 trials remain and each will demand more of your soul than the last." Morrison's laughter rang across the water, carrying genuine surprise. "Well done, Captain, but the second trial will test not your compassion, but your wisdom. Behold." The ghost fleet parted, revealing an island that rose from the sea like a dark jewel. At its center stood a massive temple built from black stone, carved with the same symbols that had decorated the golden chest. "The Temple of Choices," Morrison announced. "Within its halls you will face decisions that will determine the fate of every soul bound to this curse." Rowan anchored his ship and approached the temple, where 3 passages led into its depths. Above each entrance words appeared in silver fire: power, wealth, and truth. Standing before the entrances, Rowan remembered Hartwell's final words about some prices being too high. What if the true test wasn't choosing between obvious good and evil, but understanding what really mattered? Instead of entering any passage, Rowan sat on the temple steps and called out to Morrison. "Tell me, what happened to your crew when you made your original bargain? What price did they pay for your ambition?" Morrison's form materialized beside the temple. "My crew believed they were following me to glory. Instead, they followed me to damnation. I chose power and damned everyone who trusted me." Rowan stood up, his decision crystallizing. "Then the true test isn't what I choose for myself. It's what I choose for everyone else." He turned to face the assembled ghost fleet. "I choose to break the curse entirely, not just for the Spanish sailors but for Morrison's crew, for everyone who has been trapped by this injustice. I choose redemption for all, even if it costs me my own life." The temple began to shake as Morrison's eyes widened in shock. "The price of universal redemption is your own soul, bound to guard the treasure for eternity in my place." Someone has to guard it, Rowan replied simply, and I've done enough harm in my life to balance the scales. But Captain Mendoza stepped forward, shaking his ghostly head. No, Capitan. The curse can only be truly broken by someone who chooses love over power, mercy over vengeance. You have shown all three. The treasure's true guardian is not a prisoner, but a protector who serves willingly. The temple exploded into warm light, the radiance of sunrise after the longest night. When the brilliance faded, the golden chest sat open, its contents transformed into simple wealth, valuable but no longer cursed. The ghostly forms of every cursed soul began to solidify and warm with returning life. Morrison's crew materialized on their ships, blinking in wonder at their restored humanity. The Spanish sailors embraced each other with tears of joy. Morrison himself transformed. The supernatural fire left his eyes. His pointed teeth became normal. His crystalline hook became flesh and blood. He looked like nothing more than a middle-aged man who had finally laid down an impossible burden. It's over, he said quietly. After all these years, it's finally over. Rowan felt no victory, only profound completion. The treasure was his to claim, free of curse or obligation. Yet as he looked at the wealth, he found himself thinking of Hartwell's words about mercy being the only currency the sea truly valued. He took only what he needed, enough gold to repair the siren's revenge and provision her for home. The rest he left on the temple steps with instructions carved in stone that it should go to widows and orphans in Port Royal, to families of sailors lost at sea. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, Captain Rowan Mackenzie sailed away with a lighter heart than he had carried in 20 years. Behind him, the ghost fleet dispersed to find peace they had thought forever lost. Morrison chose to remain on the island, tending the temple and ensuring its lessons would be remembered. He had appointed himself guardian, not of treasure, but of wisdom, a fitting penance for a man who had learned too late the difference between the two.